From the very beginning, there was something different about Paul Teutul Jr. before the fame, before the brand deals, and long before millions of viewers tuned in every week. Those close to him could already see it. Raw talent, the kind you don't teach, the kind you don't expect from someone so young. When American Chopper first hit the screen, audiences were immediately drawn to this quiet but brilliant fabricator who turned cold steel into rolling art. But what the world didn't know was how deeply his passion would cost him. Paul Jr.'s rise wasn't loud or filled with dramatic declarations. It was subtle. He was the calm precision behind every curve and contour of Orange County Chopper's most iconic builds. While his father, Paul Sr., provided the thunderous presence and intimidating authority, Jr. brought the soul. He welded emotion into metal, shaping bikes that didn't just look good, they felt alive. And that was what made him a phenomenon. Fans didn't just admire his work, they connected to it. But behind this creative brilliance was a storm quietly forming. As a young man thrown into sudden stardom, Paul Jr. had no roadmap, no breathing room, and no real understanding of how big the show would become. One minute he was a talented fabricator in his father's shop, and the next he was a household name, forced to perform under the weight of expectations he never asked for. Every build became a test. Every episode became a spotlight he wasn't prepared for. And every argument, especially with his father, became national television. Still, during those early seasons, viewers saw the best of him. His vision, his craftsmanship, and his ability to turn chaos into beauty drove the success of Orange County Choppers. Bikes like the Black Widow, the Fire Bike, and the Jet Bike carried the unmistakable signature of Paul Jr.'s mind. The creativity seemed limitless. But what the cameras didn't capture was the emotional toll behind the scenes. The sleepless nights, the impossible deadlines, and the unspoken fear that one mistake could ruin everything. Even in that intense environment, Paul Jr. kept pushing. He wanted to prove himself, not just to the world, but to his father. Anyone who watched could feel the tension between them, but only a few realized how deep it went. Their relationship wasn't just strained. It was a clash of two powerful forces, one driven by pride, the other driven by passion. And while fans admired their on-screen chemistry, they didn't see the pain it created. This was the beginning of a journey that would lift Paul Jr. to extraordinary heights, but also set him on a path toward heartbreak no one imagined. Because while talent can build dreams, it can also build walls. Walls that even family can't always break through. The fame came fast, faster than anyone inside Orange County Choppers could have predicted. Overnight, Paul Jr. wasn't just a fabricator, he was a celebrity. His face was on posters, magazine covers, and TV promos. Fans lined up outside the shop just to get a glimpse of him. But fame has a strange way of exposing what's already fragile. And for Paul Jr., it magnified every pressure, every flaw, and every hidden wound. Inside the shop, the tension between him and his father was no longer a private storm. It was a televised spectacle. Arguments that would have once stayed behind closed doors were now ratings gold, replayed, dissected, and talked about by millions. And while fans saw drama, Paul Jr. felt something far more devastating. Humiliation, frustration, and the sense that no matter how good he was, it was never going to be enough for his father. Every time he walked through the shop doors, the cameras were waiting. Every spark from the welder, every adjustment to a gas tank, every hesitant inhale during an argument. It all became part of a narrative he couldn't control. And underneath the pressure of constant filming was an even heavier weight. The need to create something extraordinary every week. The show demanded perfection, but perfection came at a price. Paul Jr. began retreating inward. His jokes became quieter. His smile became hesitant. The creative spark that once flowed effortlessly started dimming under the relentless demands of fame. Fans didn't notice at first. They saw the polished edits, the dramatic angles, the triumphant bike reveals. But behind the scenes, Paul Jr. was fighting a silent battle. Burnout. He felt trapped between two worlds, the world of television, which wanted drama, and the world of fabrication, which demanded focus. And trying to serve both was slowly breaking him. His relationship with his father deteriorated further, each disagreement chipping away at their bond. And the more famous they became, the more intense the pressure grew. Paul Jr. had always been introspective, but now he was withdrawn. The cameras captured flashes of frustration, moments of exhaustion, and the rare glimpses where the smile couldn't hide the sadness underneath. Everyone around him thought he'd power through. After all, he'd always been the one who could take chaos and turn it into art. But the cracks were growing. There were days when he questioned everything. His place in the shop, his role in the family, and even his purpose in the world he helped build. The fame that once felt exciting now felt suffocating. The shop, once a creative sanctuary, became a battleground. And the father who should have been his greatest supporter was becoming his greatest source of pain. This was the period when Paul Jr.'s tragedy began taking shape. Not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, quietly, piece by painful piece. Because fame may elevate a person, but it can also expose the fractures they're trying desperately to hide. It didn't happen suddenly. That's the part most people misunderstand. The breaking point wasn't one explosive fight or one episode-ending cliffhanger. It was years of resentment, pressure, unspoken hurt, and the unbearable weight of trying to please a father who rarely showed approval. Paul Jr. had always tried to navigate the storm, but eventually even he couldn't hold the pieces together. And when that final moment arrived, it didn't just fracture a relationship. It shattered an entire legacy. By the time tensions reached their peak, viewers could see the deterioration unfolding on screen. Each confrontation between Paul Jr. and Paul Sr. became more hostile, more painful, more raw. What began as simple creative disagreements turned into full-scale emotional warfare. The shop echoed with slamming doors, raised voices, and the breaking of more than just tools. It was the breaking of trust, the breaking of family. Paul Sr.'s expectations grew heavier, and his patience grew thinner. Every mistake, no matter how minor, became ammunition. Every delay became a personal insult. And every moment Paul Jr. tried to breathe, to create, to focus, was interrupted by a criticism that cut deeper than the last. The cameras caught the outbursts, but they couldn't capture the decades of father-son tension that made each argument so devastating. And then came the day everything finally snapped. The argument that ended it all wasn't even the worst they'd had, but it was the one where Paul Sr. crossed a line that couldn't be undone. In that moment, he didn't yell at his son. He dismissed him. He spoke to him not as family, not as a partner, but as a failure. And Paul Jr., who had spent his life trying to make his father proud, felt something inside him break completely. The firing wasn't just an executive decision. It was a betrayal, a decision made not with logic, but with anger. For viewers, it was shocking. For Paul Jr., it was soul-crushing. The shop he helped build, the brand he shaped, the legacy he poured his entire youth into, it was taken from him with a few cold words. Leaving Orange County Choppers wasn't just walking away from a job. It was walking away from family, identity, and the only world he had ever known. And while the public saw the headlines, they didn't see the heartbreak behind closed doors, the silent tears, the sleepless nights, the crushing realization that no amount of talent could fix a broken relationship. The Teutul legacy wasn't destroyed by fame. It wasn't destroyed by money. It was destroyed by the one thing that should have held it together: family love that was never allowed to grow. And from this moment on, Paul Jr.'s life would take a darker turn. One filled with pain, isolation, and struggles the audience never truly understood. When the doors of Orange County Choppers closed behind him for the last time, Paul Jr. didn't step into freedom. He stepped into emptiness. Everything he had built, every design, every sleepless night, every moment of pride, was now locked behind a brand that no longer wanted him. And while the world talked about the drama, the ratings, the storyline, Paul Jr. was quietly facing something far more painful: the reality of life without the one place where he had always belonged. At first, he tried to stay strong. He told himself he would rebuild, create a new path, prove he didn't need the OCC name to succeed. But beneath that determination was a heavy, aching grief. He hadn't just lost a job. He had lost his father, lost his history, lost the identity he had carried since he was a teenager. And no matter how hard he tried to move forward, the wound kept reopening. The isolation was the hardest part. The cameras were gone. The fans weren't waiting by the gates anymore. The noise of the shop, the clanging metal, the hissing torches, the buzz of the crew, was replaced with silence. And in that silence, Paul Jr. was forced to confront the emotional toll he had ignored for years. The anger, the sadness, the exhaustion, the trauma of trying to earn love from someone who rarely gave it. But there was something even darker he struggled with, something he never openly talked about. The fear that his father was right. The fear that without OCC, without the show, without the constant push, he might fail. That maybe he wasn't enough. This internal battle consumed him, keeping him awake at night, replaying every argument, every insult, every moment he questioned his own worth. People around him noticed the change. He was quieter, more distant. He smiled less. Some days he barely spoke at all. The pressure of starting over felt suffocating, and the emotional scars from years of conflict were deeper than anyone realized. Even when he launched Paul Jr. Designs, the excitement couldn't fully erase the pain, because every success reminded him of what he could have been with his father by his side, and every challenge reminded him of why he wasn't. Friends said he struggled with sadness that came in waves, some days manageable, others overwhelming. He carried the weight of unresolved family wounds that never healed, because every time he tried to move on, memories of OCC pulled him backward. And while fans celebrated his comeback, they didn't know the nights he spent alone, wondering why love had to come with so much hurt. This was the quiet battle, the invisible tragedy, the one the cameras never filmed, the one he tried hardest to hide. But the truth is, the strongest fabricator on the show was breaking on the inside, piece by piece, struggling to hold together a life that fame had torn apart. As the years passed, something unexpected happened. Behind the scenes, away from the TV lights and the shop chaos, the truth about Paul Jr.'s emotional journey began to surface. Fans who once watched for entertainment slowly realized that the story they had been following wasn't just about custom bikes or family conflict. It was about a son who had been carrying a silent burden for far too long. And when the real picture emerged, it left millions heartbroken. Paul Jr. had always been portrayed as the calm, collected fabricator. The guy who could handle pressure, deal with conflict, and still produce masterpieces. But the truth was far more painful. He had spent years walking a tightrope between love and resentment, between wanting his father's approval and protecting himself from the harshness that came with it. And once he was gone from OCC, the emotional damage became impossible to hide. Interviews, conversations, and comments he made later on painted a clearer picture. He spoke openly about the pain of growing up under constant criticism, of never feeling fully accepted, and of the emotional battles he fought while millions watched. Fans who once saw the drama as good television now realized they had been witnessing a slow unraveling of a father-son bond that should have been sacred. What hurt people the most was understanding how deeply Paul Jr. had wanted things to be different. He didn't want fame. He didn't want conflict. He wanted a family that communicated, supported, and loved each other without conditions. Yet, instead of that, he found himself trapped in a cycle of tension that pushed him to his breaking point. The more he opened up, the more fans saw a man who had spent years smiling through pain that was never his fault. But the tragedy didn't stop there. Even after rebuilding his life with Paul Jr. Designs, even after finding some peace, the scars remained. He admitted the relationship with his father was deeply fractured. Some wounds healed, some didn't, and some were too deep to fully repair. And fans finally understood just how much he had carried alone. Yet in this heartbreak, there was strength. Paul Jr. used his pain not to destroy himself, but to build something new. He became a devoted husband, a loving father, and a man determined to break the cycle that hurt him. He learned to create without pressure, to lead without anger, and to love without fear. But the tragedy, his tragedy, was the realization that everything he endured didn't have to happen. The fame, the fights, the emotional damage, all of it could have been avoided if love had come before television. And that's why fans are heartbroken today. Because while Paul Jr. survived his darkest chapters, he never got the one thing he wanted most. A father who understood him, supported him, and stood by his side. Not as a boss, but as a dad. His story isn't just about motorcycles. It's about the price of fame, the cost of unresolved pain, and the emotional wounds that reality TV never shows. In the end, the heartbreaking story of Paul Teutul Jr. is not about motorcycles, metal, or television drama. It's about a son who gave everything he had, his talent, his creativity, his youth, only to discover that some battles can't be won in the spotlight. The world watched him rise, watched him break, and watched him rebuild from the ashes of a legacy that should have protected him, not destroyed him. And yet, despite the pain, despite the isolation, despite the scars no camera ever captured, Paul Jr. became something far greater than a reality star. He became living proof that strength doesn't come from the absence of suffering. It comes from the courage to keep going when everything in your world has fallen apart. Today, fans see the truth more clearly than ever. They don't just admire his bikes. They admire his resilience. They admire the man who refused to let heartbreak define him. Because in the end, Paul Jr.'s real masterpiece wasn't forged in steel. It was forged in survival. And as his story continues, one thing is certain. The tragedy that once broke him has become the very thing that inspires millions. His journey reminds us that no matter how dark life gets, there is always a way forward, even when the pain comes from the people we love the most.